Hi everyone, welcome to Psychiatry Simplified, the world's leading psychiatry channel for all things psychiatry and neuroscience related. We combine years of clinical experience with academic knowledge with the aim of helping you understand the brain and the mind-body connection better. I'm Sanil Rege, consultant psychiatrist, founder of Psychiatry and Vita Healthcare. If you're new to this channel, be sure to like, subscribe and turn on that notification bell to avoid missing out on our valuable content covering all things mental health and psychiatry. In this video, I'm going to take you through a journey through the key parts of the brain from a mental health perspective that allows us to function as human beings effectively. The key mental health functions can be distilled into the mnemonic PACES or SPACE if you wish to rearrange it. P stands for perception, A for activity, C for cognition, E for emotion. However, here I'd like to put arousal and reward as well, because emotion really is closely linked to both the experience of reward, positive and aversive, but also arousal aspects at different levels, which all link to emotion. And finally, sleep. So you can think about this as PACES or SPACE. This is in no particular order as such, but if you think about these five functions are essentially what makes us a human being. And what we have to ensure as we move through life is that each of these functions is maintained and looked after adequately as best as possible. And any significant disturbance in any of these domains can be linked to pathology or can result in what we call dysfunction. When we think about the permutations and combinations within these functions and then link them to psychiatry, we often have a range of diagnoses to explain these. For example, in depression, we have activity, cognition, and emotion affected. Remember, the reward aspects can be affected so that individuals have what we call a reward deficient state or reward deficiency state. So therefore, we have anhedonia, amotivation. Their cognitions may be affected, for example, having negative thoughts, but also the cognitive aspects of executive function, planning, sequencing, error detection, decision-making, initiating and completing tasks. But they may also have additional thoughts from a cognitive perspective of low self-esteem, low self-worth, lack of confidence, worthlessness, hopelessness, and this cascade worsens. And in some cases, of course, the hopelessness moves toward more sort of drastic thoughts. Similarly, activity can be affected. Here, this can be either agitation, what we call psychomotor agitation, which is a key initial response to stress, particularly pervasive, uncontrollable stresses, which may then later move towards what we call motor retardation. Now, this was an example of what happens in depression. Now, if trauma is present on top of this, the individual can present both with the reward deficiency state that I mentioned, with emotion aspects affected significantly, but then the emotional aspects also include arousal symptoms that might be significant, what we call hypervigilance, and therefore, this particular individual may have what is called a trauma-related disorder. Now, this has several labels, for example, PTSD or complex PTSD, along with a depressive disorder. So we've just touched very briefly on the A, the C, the E, and you can see that a range of symptoms occur in the context of depression and even trauma. Similarly, if the P is affected, where this is linked to perception. Now, perception is very much about our senses as well, but if the perception's affected, where hallucinatory phenomena come in, this may be linked to diagnoses such as schizophrenia, schizophreniform psychosis, bipolar affective disorder with psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, prodromal psychosis. Essentially, it means that the perceptual aspects are affected significantly. Now, here in perception, we have a range of senses: visual, auditory, gustatory, tactile, and hence hallucinatory phenomenon can occur in all of these particular sensations. But perception also includes pain. So individuals can, on top of, say, depression, have a chronic pain syndrome. So now if we think about these five domains, perception, activity, cognition, emotion, and sleep, we know that each of these functions map quite well onto the brain. And that is what I'm going to take you through over the rest of the video. I will start off naming the different parts of the brain. Firstly, you can see here, this is the amygdala. This is the fear and threat area of the brain. Having said that, it also plays a very important role linked to reward learning and aversion. So it puts a value on the rewards that we experience. So when we do experience a reward, it helps us consolidate the tasks that led to the reward. If we have an aversive response, it helps us learn to avoid those aspects. So you may think about the fight and flight, for example. Stimuli that would be fearful trigger off a fight and flight response. The hippocampus is just above the amygdala here. And here, the hippocampus stores memories. So the connection from the amygdala and hippocampus is important as it responds based on our past experiences. Then we have the nucleus accumbens, also at times interchangeably known as the ventral striatum, and that is situated over here. Now, this is the reward part of the brain where dopamine is released to experience a reward. Then we have the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, there is an entire sort of part here that's divided into the dorsal and the ventral anterior cingulate cortex, but just for the purpose of this particular video, I'm going to draw a sort of smaller point of the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, this helps us add a value to the experience, but helps us additionally make a decision about whether or not a task that we're going to do is worth it. So now when we think about the amygdala, which basically assesses a reward or an aversive experience, what the anterior cingulate cortex does is it will basically decide as to whether or not we are going to go and solve that particular threat, or is it better, for example, to move away from it. Then we have the different parts of the frontal lobe. Here, this is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function, planning, sequencing, error detection, error monitoring, initiation of task, and completion of task. Next, we have the ventromedial prefrontal cortex that plays an important role in mood regulation. And here what it does is that it has an inhibitory effect on the arousal part of the brain, particularly the amygdala. So what it does, if you think about it, it has what's called a top-down inhibition. So when the amygdala is excessively activated, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex will sort of calm it down. So essentially, it will inhibit the subcortical primitive parts of the brain from taking over. And then we have the orbitofrontal cortex, which is part of the reward network. This part of the brain is responsible for reward experience and particularly linked to anticipation and prediction of tasks. It associates a value to those tasks as well with regards to anticipating a particular reward. Now, this particular part of the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, is closely linked to the nucleus accumbens or the ventral striatum, and this network is one part of the reward network. Now, before I go any further, of course, the brain's been sort of drawn really nicely and set up for me. It wasn't by me, so I should give a big shout out to our project manager, Alex. Then we have what is called the striatum. And the striatum is a key part of the basal ganglia. And here we have two key parts. The dorsomedial part, DM, which is responsible for goal-directed actions. And then we have the dorsolateral part that is responsible for habitual actions. Now, with those areas in mind, let me take you through how the brain works. Just as I woke up this morning to do this talk, the first thing, of course, that comes to mind is the anticipation of me going and doing this particular talk, but I'm expecting a reward. And this reward is sharing this with you, hoping that it makes a difference to individuals, if you're a clinician, to patients, etc. If this was aversive, it's unlikely that I would be standing here in front of you. But this anticipation is linked to my experiences. And here I must give all of you a big shout out, your interaction, likes on YouTube, the comments, the discussions, things I've learned from your comments. So thank you so much for stimulating the reward parts of my brain so it motivates me to do more. Which in neurobiological language is thank you for stimulating the nucleus accumbens to release dopamine so that my prefrontal cortex can think more, to create more. Remember, dopamine is responsible for creative thinking. And my motivation is nothing but the striatum being activated, the goal-directed part, and the habitual part to put the actions in place, assemble this wonderful team to come together to create videos for you. As human beings, everything we do is linked to reward seeking in one way or the other. Life can be summarized into human beings are reward seeking organisms with the enhanced ability to minimize reward prediction errors and therefore have the potential to continually advance in various fields of interest. We'll come later to reward prediction error. Now let's go back to this morning. So I wake up in the morning, I anticipate, and what I'm really anticipating is that when I do this video, I'm sharing my knowledge, I can make a difference and hence anticipate a reward. So the nucleus accumbens has anticipated this reward based on previous set points. People have found it useful, and that reward learning has been consolidated in my reward pathway, which includes the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, and of course the orbitofrontal cortex. But simply anticipating doesn't get me the actual reward. An action has to be implemented for me to get there. So what then happens is that the prefrontal cortex, specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, plans, sequences, thinks through the plan of this particular video that I'm going to do. And it has then sent the signals back to the nucleus accumbens. And this comes together with the anterior cingulate cortex, where now they will come together to calculate the effort that's going to be required. A value has been determined, and the big question is it worth it? Based on this attributed value, a decision is made. This decision is then transferred to the striatal areas. And this could be the goal-directed part of the brain if this was a new action, something completely new I'm doing. I'm now implementing a goal, but there are several aspects that are already there in the habits area of my brain. So I don't really have to put too much cognitive effort on those aspects. So whilst I'm doing this, both the goal-directed area and the habit part of the striatum are active. Most of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, they are habitual. Driving, putting your clothes on, hailing a cab to go somewhere. We don't need too much cognitive effort here. And this is what we call the implicit or the procedural memory. So now you can see that all these parts of the brain have been set into motion to talk to all of you and do this video. But at the same time, you see my amygdala is firing because it's exposed to a stress. Now, stresses don't have to be just negative. Stresses can be positive or negative. A certain amount of stress is necessary in life for activation of our vigilance areas and to also help with reward learning. It's what drives motivation. Too much is harmful, too little is harmful. So we need an optimum level of arousal, vigilance, and that arises from the amygdala. There is the Yerkes-Dodson curve that also covers this, which looks at an optimal level of stress for performance. Now, if you're a clinician, you would love the Academy. We cover this more in the Academy by Psychiatry. We covered the Goldilocks effect of the prefrontal cortex functioning, which is relevant in ADHD or depressive disorders. If you want to delve deeper into structured psychiatry learning, head to the Academy where we have loads of videos, PDF structured courses to take your learning to the next level. Think better, think smarter, discover more, and change lives. So back to the amygdala. It is the value that we put on the stress or the task that makes them positive or negative from our perspective. Whether we link it to reward or aversion, this is linked to the amygdala sensitivity. And a lot of this amygdala sensitivity is influenced by our childhood and adolescent experiences. In childhood and adolescence, the prefrontal cortex is developing, and the limbic brain, the amygdala, the brainstem areas, these are dominant, a lot more dominant than the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex development sort of completes around 25 years of age. And this is why adolescents are called limbic dominant humans. This prefrontal cortex that has an inhibitory effect on the amygdala is not completely developed. So the amygdala and the limbic system is more dominant during childhood and adolescence, which is why there is a tendency towards the immediate gratification of rewards and emotional dysregulation, temper tantrums, for example, impulsive behavior, etc. So therefore, the amygdala in this situation, in the context of stresses, does experience a heightening. It's activated. And a certain amount of heightening is beneficial because that will motivate me. Now, the amygdala has a very, very high concentration of noradrenergic neurons. These noradrenergic neurons, when activated, improves vigilance, improves cognition as well, but not too much. So in my situation, the amygdala, whilst I'm doing this video, has to be under control of the prefrontal cortex. And this is what the ventromedial prefrontal cortex will be doing, is calming that amygdala down so that it does not go into overdrive, or else my performance will be significantly affected. Imagine someone who's doing a talk for the first time, for example. You've probably seen individuals that are very anxious at the start. So this is essentially the overactivity of the amygdala. So what we've touched on, we've looked at prefrontal cortex, the reward, the striatum, but also the role of the amygdala. And then finally, at the end of the day, once I complete this, there will be a certain feeling of reward, satisfaction as well. Until the next day, I go through the same process again. Now let's look at what happens when we keep active. The neural activity of my brain, whilst I'm doing this, has been quite active. We know that increasing your neural activity, there is ATP production. ATP gets broken down into adenosine. Adenosine is the homeostatic sleep neurotransmitter. And as this builds up, there will be a certain amount of fatigue setting in on a busy day. As light goes down in the late evening, and I'm doing this in Bali, so in beautiful Bali, my melatonin starts increasing. Dopamine starts going down. Adenosine is there to build the sleep pressure. And my prefrontal cortex will gradually start calming down the arousal systems and then help me sleep. Make sure you check out the neurobiology of sleep on this channel. And of course, we've got more structured courses on the Academy as well. Now, sleep is a really important function for human beings as it affects cognition, activity, emotions, metabolic health, and immune function. So this is the S component of PACEs. We need to ensure that there is adequate deep sleep, or non-REM sleep as it's called, because that is where the restorative aspects of sleep take place, where the waste clearance system of the brain is active. Think about it as the garbage truck of the brain, the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system essentially is most active in non-REM or deep sleep. So with regards to sleep, we cycle through non-REM and REM through the sleep period. And of course, even dream. We dream in the REM phase. Now, there is evidence that there is a certain dreaming aspect in non-REM as well, but the nature of those dreams is a bit different. The REM sleep is important, and here we need restful REM sleep. And in order for restful REM sleep to occur, the noradrenergic system needs to be completely silenced. So this is known as noradrenaline timeout. This is necessary for emotional processing and synaptic plasticity. This allows for the activation and arousal parts of the day to function properly so that I can come back again and produce more. A few nights of poor sleep, or even one night of poor sleep, can significantly affect my performance because of the increase in noradrenaline that occurs with sleep deprivation. So that is essentially how a brain functions in an adaptive way. If we ask the big question, can these aspects, can these particular domains be affected? Absolutely. And I'd like you to imagine an individual where they have been exposed to stress over an extended period, where this amygdala is continually firing. You see, what happens here is that the amygdala is continually firing. Usually, this prefrontal cortex, which has this top-down inhibition, is present. But here what happens is when the person gets up, the anticipation is not the same. Why? Because there is a certain amount of fear that's present. In the early stages, this is of course what we call anxiety. So therefore, this is associated with decreased anticipation of the task, what we call anticipatory anxiety. And if that persists continuously over months or years, then that can result in anticipatory anhedonia, where the individual moves towards the reward deficient state. Now, the association with that particular task may still be there, but it is a fearful association. The anterior cingulate cortex is putting a negative value on this effort. Therefore, the desired effort is down, desired value is down, motivation is down, and can result in avoidance. And this is the cascade towards amotivation. But let's say that this person keeps going to work, continually engages in life, and then they have a stressor that they can't necessarily control because of fatigue from the prefrontal cortex or anxiety because of the amygdala hyperactivity. In that case, what happens is the cascade continues and they can move towards a significant reward deficient state. The initial activation of amygdala is necessary in problem solving, but in this case, if events are outside their control or their decision making is impacted, then no matter what actions they put in place, they aren't experiencing a reward. And the individual starts experiencing the next form of anhedonia known as the consummatory anhedonia. So we had anticipatory anhedonia initially with regards to the anxiety. Here, the individual is still making plans to solve the problem, but when that is uncontrollable, now the individual moves towards consummatory anhedonia. So any pleasures that they would normally receive a pleasure from has gone down here, and that's the consummatory anhedonia. No matter what I do, there is no pleasure. What is the point? And this then, the combination of anticipatory, consummatory anhedonia leads to motivational anhedonia. And through all of this period, the amygdala is basically filled with aversive responses. The issue with persistent amygdala overactivity is that it weakens the prefrontal cortex function. And this it does by excessive noradrenaline release, activating the alpha-1 receptors, which actually reduces cognitive flexibility, results in impulsivity. And this is much more enhanced in children and adolescents as their limbic system is dominant. Now, the amygdala dysfunction does not just affect daytime functioning, but impacts sleep as well because of the high concentration of noradrenergic neurons. Therefore, this results in sleep dysfunction as well, what we call restless REM sleep. And individuals here can present with nightmares or vivid dreams. Now, restless REM sleep prevents individuals from entering into non-REM sleep, which is an important part, we said, to activate the glymphatic system for the restoration to remove the toxins. So now we've got a cascade essentially resulting in ongoing structural and functional abnormalities of the brain that impact both sleep and daytime functioning, setting up a vicious cycle. Now, this can affect activity, cognition, and emotions, reward and arousal. But perception also starts getting affected, particularly in the later stages of this particular constellation of symptoms. And why does that happen? Perception is closely linked to what we call the salience network. Now, the salience network also includes the amygdala. So you've got the amygdala, so I'm putting S here as part of the salience network. And then you have a really key component of the brain known as the insula. You see, the insula essentially integrates all the information from our sensations from within, including external stimuli, and puts it in the right context in terms of whether this is something one has to pay attention to or one's got to move towards paying attention to something else. It is the seat of what we call interoceptive awareness. And the third key part of the salience network is the anterior cingulate cortex, which we've spoken about. So now the amygdala, along with the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, as I mentioned, keep an internal representation of self and external representation of how we are with the world. And they interpret external and internal stimuli. Now, when there is a significant amount of stress, this can gradually start changing the salience network interpretation. Now, there is a whole hierarchy or cascade of what we call the mesolimbic hierarchy, from internal restlessness, ruminations, preoccupations, all the way towards the most severe end of aberrant salience, known as psychosis. And here individuals have hallucinations and delusions. Why? Because internal sensations can be misinterpreted catastrophically. Example, mild abdominal pain may be interpreted as I have cancer, as seen as psychotic depression. Or financial stresses may be interpreted as having no money or delusions of poverty. Internal sounds can be interpreted as external voices. So to summarize, psychiatry or mental health in general is about paces or space for perception, activity, cognition, emotion, and sleep. All of these domains are mapped onto the brain. And what we do on a day-to-day basis is a result of a delicate balance of activation of certain parts of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, the reward systems, but at the same time, inhibition of different parts of the brain, such as the amygdala and other subcortical areas. Importantly, these areas of the brain can be affected by a range of factors. And this is why we consider a formulation when we think about addressing a psychiatric issue, a biological, psychosocial, cultural, diet and lifestyle formulation, because various factors within these different domains can influence the brain. So I hope that this has given you a good idea about our brain, and I'm hoping that by listening to this video, viewing this video, you receive a reward as well. I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Until then, stay fascinated.